Lima.
Yeah, these folk tales stem from the experiences of oppressed people, forced to use symbolic code words and language to counter the hostilities of slavery and discrimination. Often, animal characters were substituted to disguise resemblance to the oppressor or slave master. Survival of the fittest was a recurring theme, and the fittest was not always the physically strong, but the one with cunning and imagination, like the clever rabbit in African American folklore or the spider in African and Caribbean tales. We meet the cunning spider in Anansi's strength. This story illustrates creativity, or Kuumba, and is read by David Allen Grier.
When you hear stories from West Africa, Anansi the spider keeps popping up. Now, it's only natural to wonder why people would tell so many stories about a spider. After all, spiders aren't known for being beautiful, or strong, or smart, or any of the things we're telling stories about. But that just shows how little you know about spiders in general, and Anansi in particular. But that's all right, though. I've got a story that will set you straight. It starts way back, a long time ago, when the animals ruled the world in a land where Tiger was king. All the other animals recognized Tiger as the greatest of them all. Everybody admired him. Nobody would even think of disrespecting him. Whenever they told stories, they were mostly about Tiger and how great and wonderful he was. Things were a lot different for poor little Anansi the spider. Everybody made fun of him for being so tiny and so weak. They not only made jokes behind his back, they made fun of him in front of his face. Even though he worked hard and never did anybody any harm, he got no respect. It didn't look like he ever would. That's how it was, day after day, year after year, until one day, little Anansi got fed up. He decided to pay Tiger a visit so they could have a talk. Tiger lived pretty far away in the rich part of the forest, and with his tiny legs, it took Anansi quite a while to get there. Once he got to Tiger's lair, it seemed like he had to wait forever to even get a chance to talk to him. Everybody else got a chance to talk to Tiger before Anansi. Stork, hyena, warthog, even rat got a chance to talk to Tiger before him. Finally, after everybody else was done, Anansi walked up to Tiger's feet and took a deep bow. Tiger acted like he didn't see him. Anansi said, "Excuse me, Mr. Tiger." Tiger acted like he didn't even hear him. So Anansi said it again. Only louder this time. "Excuse me, Mr. Tiger." This time, Tiger looked down. He looked bored, like he had better things to do. Tiger said,
"What do you want?"
He didn't even bother to be polite. Anansi said, "I'm very sorry to bother you, but I've got to ask you a favor."
"You've come to ask for a favor?"
said Tiger.
"What kind of favor?"
Anansi explained that because Tiger was the greatest of all animals, many things were named after him. There were tiger lilies, tiger moths, tiger tails, and more. There was no end to tiger things. The other animals, like Brother Rabbit, Brother Fox, had stories named after them, but because Anansi was so small and weak, nothing was named after him. Not a thing. Now, that didn't seem fair. "All I ask," said Anansi, "is to have all the stories we tell before bedtime to be about me, so that those that come after us will remember my name." Well, it just so happened that Tiger was thinking of having all the bedtime stories to be told about him alone. He said to himself,
"Anansi is so pitiful. What makes him think I would ever give anything to someone as weak as him? He needs to be taught a lesson. I will make him think twice before he ever asks me a favor again." So Tiger says to Anansi, "I can arrange for all the stories we tell to be told about you. But if I do that for you, you have to do something for me first." "Name it," said Anansi. "Bring Snake to me alive," said Tiger with a smile. He knew Snake was very smart and much stronger than Anansi. Anansi knew it too, but he agreed just the same. On his way home,
Word began to spread through the forest about what Tiger had asked Anansi to do. Everybody agreed that Anansi was a fool to think he could ever bring Snake back alive. The very idea made them laugh at Anansi even more. But the more they laughed, the more determined Anansi was to catch Snake. He started thinking first thing Monday morning. All day he thought of one plan after another. He didn't even bother to stop and eat. Finally, as the sun was starting to set, he thought of a plan that would be sure to work. When the sun rose Tuesday morning, Anansi set about building a trap. He made a rope from a long vine and fashioned a noose at the end. Then he laid the vine and the noose on the ground and covered it with leaves. Inside the noose, he put a little pile of blueberries. Snake loved blueberries. Once his trap was set, Anansi waited patiently for Snake to crawl by. Sure enough, after a while, Snake crawled by, and seeing the berries he loved so much, he stopped to eat them. But instead of crawling over the vine, Snake coiled his body and arched his head above the noose, leaving nothing for the noose to grab. Anansi's plan had failed. On Wednesday, Anansi dug a deep hole in the middle of a path Snake used to go to the pond for a drink of water. Anansi coated the sides of the hole with grease. Then he tossed in some ripe bananas. Mr. Snake loved bananas almost as much as he loved blueberries. While Anansi waited in the bushes for Mr. Snake to come by, he thought to himself, "This time, I've got him." After a while, Snake comes down the path on his way to the pond, hungry and thirsty. He came up to the hole, peeked inside, then licked his lips. You know the way snakes like to do. He really wanted those bananas. But instead of crawling into the hole the way Anansi expected him to, Snake wrapped his tail around a nearby bush. When he crawled into the hole and ate the bananas, his tail kept him from falling in. Anansi had failed again. Thursday came around. This time, Anansi made a trap with a nice fresh egg as bait. Mr. Snake loved eggs most of all. His plan was to wait in the trees above for Mr. Snake to eat the egg. Then he'd drop a net on top of him. It almost worked, except when Mr. Snake started eating the egg and Anansi dropped the net, Snake just burrowed down into the sand and got away. Anansi had failed 3 times in a row. Anansi spent all day Friday trying to come up with a new plan, but without success. It didn't help that by now all the animals, including Tiger, had heard about him trying to catch Snake and failing every time. He could hear them laughing even deep in the poor part of the forest where he lived. He could even hear them laughing as he fell asleep. Then came Saturday morning. Anansi rose bright and early and decided to take a walk. While he was walking, he passed by the cave where Snake lived. Snake was mostly inside, with just his head poking out. "Good morning, Mr. Snake," said Anansi. Snake said, "You got a lot of nerve saying good morning to me, Mr. Anansi, after all you've done. On Tuesday, you tried to trap me with a noose. On Wednesday, you tried to trap me in a slippery hole. On Thursday, you tried to trap me with a net. You probably spent all day Friday trying to think of even more mischief. I'm warning you, if you try to trap me one more time, I'll make you suffer." "You're right, Mr. Snake," said Anansi. "There's no way I could ever trap you. You're too smart for me. If I wasn't so stupid, I never would have made that bet with Mouse." "What bet?" asked Mr. Snake. "I bet my friend Mouse that you were the longest animal in the forest," said Anansi. "I bet that you were even longer than the longest bamboo pole. But Mouse insisted that a bamboo pole was much, much longer." "Wow!" shouted Mr. Snake. "That is ridiculous. Everybody knows I'm longer than a bamboo pole." "Well, Mouse doesn't seem to think so," said Anansi. Then he pointed to a nearby stand of bamboo and said, "Besides, I have to admit that bamboo over there looks awfully long." "Well, that's because you haven't seen my full length," said Mr. Snake. He crawled out of his cave and stretched himself straight. Anansi marveled at his length and said, "You're right. You're extremely long. But that bamboo over there sure looks pretty long, too. In fact, it looks quite a bit longer. I can't be sure, though, because the bamboo is further away." "Then cut down a piece and bring it over here," shouted Snake. "We'll settle this once and for all." Snake knew he was the longest animal in the forest, and he wasn't going to let anybody, especially Anansi, a spider, say he wasn't. So Anansi hurried off and cut down the longest piece of bamboo he could find. Next, he lopped off the leaves and branches so there was nothing left but a long, straight, smooth bamboo pole. When he dragged it back to where Snake was lying on the ground, Snake said, "Lay it down beside me. You'll see I'm a lot longer than some stupid piece of bamboo." Anansi shook his head and said, "No offense, Mr. Snake, but if I go to see where your head is, you might crawl up. And if I go to see where your tail is, you might crawl down. If you move, you'll always look longer than the bamboo, which, by the way, I think really is longer than you are." By now, Snake was hissing with anger. He said, "All right, if you don't believe me, then tie my tail to one end of the bamboo. When you see my head stretch past the other end, you'll know I'm longer." So Anansi did as he was told. He tied Snake's tail to one end of the bamboo. By now, a small crowd of animals had gathered round, curious to see what was going on. As soon as they found out that Snake was trying to prove he was the longest animal in the forest, they started to root for him, shouting, "Stretch, Snake! Stretch, Snake! Come on, stretch, Snake! Stretch, Snake!" Now, while Snake was stretching, Anansi tied him to the middle of the bamboo to make sure he didn't slip back. By now, Snake's head was only a few inches from the end of the bamboo. The animals got even more excited. They started jumping up and down and yelling, "Stretch, Snake! Stretch, Snake! Stretch, Snake! Stretch, Snake!" Snake stretched with all his might, but no matter how hard he tried, he still couldn't stretch that last quarter inch. That's when Anansi said, "Why don't you take a little rest? And then when you've relaxed, close your eyes and give it all you've got. I bet you'll make it then." Snake agreed that was an excellent idea, so he rested for a few seconds. Then he closed his eyes and stretched till he thought he'd come apart. Then he gave one more try and he did it! He proved he was longer. All the animals cheered. "Yay, Snake! Yay, Snake! Yay, Snake!" But the very second they started cheering, Anansi tied Snake's head to the end of the bamboo. The cheering stopped. They all suddenly realized what Anansi had done. Weak little Anansi the spider had captured Snake alive, all by himself. Dragging Snake to Tiger would be no problem. Even for Anansi, he had gotten the last laugh, and believe you me, he really enjoyed it. So now you know why so many stories are told about Anansi. It's partly because Tiger kept his promise, but it's mostly because of Anansi's hidden strength, his creativity.